Welcome to Based On, the podcast where we compare a movie and adaptation from a written work. And today we're going to be talking about Gerald's Game, written by Stephen King. And then the movie is by the same name, Gerald's Game. So we'll start.
That's the first one we've done where they both have the same title. I think it is.
Yeah, because even Romeo and Juliet was changed slightly
to Romeo Plus.
Yeah, and then there was Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now. So yeah, I think that's the first one, Gerald's Game and Gerald's Game. So very original. So this was written by Stephen King, and then the movie was
1992.
1992, and then the movie was made in 2018, I believe.
Yeah,
2017. So let's just start with the overview, the plot summary of the book. This will be specific to the book.
In this case, it will also go to the movie, just because, unlike the stuff we've done in the past, this is much more one-to-one adaptation.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
there are some slight differences that we'll talk about later on, but it's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Retelling of the story. So the story starts with a man and a woman. They're married, and they're going to their lake house to spend a few days, a weekend. And they, I guess, almost immediately upon arriving, they start to do some intimate things of a sexual nature. And part of it involves handcuffs. And so the man, he's
Gerald, by the way.
Gerald. He is Gerald. He handcuffs his wife, Jessie, to the bed. And this is something in the book that they've done a few times in their marriage, a bunch of times, I guess. Gerald really likes it. Jessie,
not so much.
Not as much as Gerald, certainly. But it's something they've done. And so he gets her handcuffed, and they start getting intimate. And Jessie decides that she is not feeling it this time, and so she says she wants to stop. Gerald initially takes it as this is part of the game, hence the game, and so he keeps playing along. And then there comes a point where he realizes that she really doesn't want to do this, and it's not part of the game, and he continues to proceed. And
so depending on which version you're watching or reading, she kicks him either in the balls or in the chest, and subsequently leads to a heart attack on his end, and he dies. Does he die on top of her? Or he has a heart attack, falls off the bed, dies, and she's left handcuffed to the bed. And what goes from there is her trying to figure out how to essentially stay alive for the first little bit, and because she can't get out of the handcuffs, she can't get off the bed, and it turns into her delving into her psyche and kind of facing the stuff that she's been running from for a long time. And over the course of that, she starts seeing another person in the corner of her room, who she calls the Moonlight Man or the Space Cowboy.
Mm-hmm.
She gives him a dozen different names. And throughout the course of the story, there's a question of whether he's real or whether he's part of her imagination. And over the course of the story, she goes into some of her past trauma, relives an experience that she had with her father when she was really young. Not wholly similar to... essentially, what comes to light is that her father molested her, and she's been repressing and running away from that for pretty much her whole life. And she's now just barely coming to terms with it, and coming to terms with her relationship with Gerald and with herself and everyone else in her life, really. And after she's kind of faced everything, she realizes how she can get out of the handcuffs, which is much easier said than done. But she does get out and faces the Moonlight Man, and then gets into her and her husband's car and drives off. And then from there, there's kind of this, in both versions, there's this let's wrap up moment where it talks about like who the Moonlight Man really is, and we can get more into that as we talk, and how she's come out of that experience stronger, and how she's able to incorporate like her past experiences, and she's no longer running from who she is and what she has to do with her life.
Yeah, and the bulk of the book is really, and the substance of the book is really the psychological part of her dealing with herself and her past. And it's interesting that her physical bondage, where she can't run physically, is when she stops running psychologically.
Yeah.
There's nothing to distract her, and she has to conquer a lot of her own demons before she can conquer the demon, and subsequently the Moonlight Man. So most of the book is a psychological interaction with herself, I guess you could say. So yeah, that sums up the book pretty well. And we'll go into some more detail as we move through this episode.
So we kind of switched it up this time. I'm the one who watched the movie first this time. You read it first.
Yeah.
What did you feel was mandatory?
So I thought for sure that,
to be clear, mandatory from the book. That needed to be in the movie when you watched it.
Yes. So I thought for sure, and what really I wondered how it would be portrayed in the movie were the inner voices that she has. As Jessie is handcuffed to the beds, she's having these conversations with different parts of herself that she's kind of personified in her mind and given characters of people from her past. And
one of the main ones is like an old college roommate who is kind of the voice that doesn't take shit from anyone and is kind of ridiculing herself as well, and pointing out that it's her fault that she's in the mess that she's in, and if she had stood up for herself or said something sooner, she wouldn't be handcuffed to the bed.
Yeah, and in the book there are, I don't know that I ever counted, but there's a bunch of these different voices, and they're all given names, and you get little snippets of their backstory, why she has made this part of herself this person, like her roommate, this part of herself an old lady, this part of herself is just another part of her, her younger self, this part's her mom, and it kind of describes and tells you why it does this. So I thought for sure there had to be inner voices. They do it a little differently in the movie, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I think. And then I wanted, what I thought would have to be mandatory is the tension that is in the book. Now, just to talk a little bit about the tension in the book, it is very inconsistent.
Yeah.
Throughout the book. You'll have a chapter or two or a section that's really intense, and you're just gripping the book and just really blitzing through the pages because you really want to see what happens. And then you'll have 2 or 3 chapters that are just like painful to get to. There's not much happening. You don't feel the tension.
Part of it's because it sets up what's going to happen next, and then it spends 2 or 3 chapters with her arguing with the inner voices over whether she's actually going to do it. And having watched the movie first, I would read a chapter and I'd be like, okay, obviously the next chapter is going to be this scene that I saw in the movie, but that isn't for 3 or 4 more chapters. I could only explain the pacing in the book like a 16-year-old driving for the first time, just hitting the gas pedal as hard as they can and then like screeching to a halt at a stop sign and nervous to like take their turn to go.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. And the thing is, the parts that do have a lot of tension, the really intense part, are really, really good.
They're spot on.
Yeah, and it really grips you. Unfortunately, then you have a bunch of parts that are just kind of not. But so I was interested to see how they were going to have the tension in the movie. Yeah, so those are the two things that really stood out to me that had to be in the movie for it to call itself a retelling of the book. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So, having to, not to beat a dead horse on the pacing thing, but that was the thing that really surprised me reading the book. Like I said, when I picked up the book and saw that it was 400 pages long, I seriously thought, how could this be 400 pages? Maybe 200 tops. I didn't understand how. It does spend a lot more time in her head, and it develops her as a character a little bit more. But, so, like we said, it comes to light about halfway through the book that her father molested her. It comes to light about halfway through the movie as well. Except for in the book, it skirts the line. There's a few chapters where right towards the end, it's about to tell you what happened, and then she willfully suppresses the memory again. Which, as a character, I can see why she would do that, but reading it, after the second time she's suppressing it, you kind of already know what's going to happen, and it just it feels like you're getting toyed with more than anything. And that was one of the things that really surprised me, was just this constant, let's almost get to what's about to happen and then make a U-turn and come back to it in 20 or so pages.
Yeah. It in a way, I don't really know how to say this without making it sound really weird. It kind of ruined the moment for me when you did finally learn about what happened to her. Because you already, at that point, you had formed what was going to happen in your mind. It had been alluded to so many times that when it actually happened, and it is a horrific scene, and then like you were saying, like you understand why the character represses it and doesn't want to think about it. But when you finally hear about it, it's just like, yeah, I know. Like, there's no surprise here.
If anything, you probably have thought of something worse.
Yes.
And not to say what happens to her isn't horrific, but you probably thought it was worse than what you find out it is. And yeah. And maybe that was like the idea, was to make you build it up in your mind, but I didn't really agree with that. Some of the big things that I was shocked to find in the book was the voices. Like we talked about, they were like Cordy said, yeah, they are mandatory for adapting this story, this inner voice and this inner fight within herself, because honestly, it's really just her for most of the story. But in having them have different personalities, I was very surprised to see that, because that's not the way it is in the movie. If you've seen it, the college roommate, the old lady that criticizes her younger self is in it a little bit, but most of those are just her arguing with a version of herself that's outside of the cuffs. So it was really surprising to see that. And when I was reading it, I actually liked it a lot in the book and was kind of wondering why they didn't put it in. We're going to be talking about that in a minute. Another big part that surprised me with the voice. So throughout the story, there's a dog who, after her husband dies, it gets into the house and starts eating parts of her husband. And that's in the movie as well. But there's whole chapters that are from the dog's perspective, which was really cool. And I liked it in the book, but it's just something you can't do in a movie. And if they did do it, it would come across as Disney.
Like Homeward Bound or something. Which is fine when you're 7 or 8. I love that movie. A lot of animals talking. But it's exactly right. In the movie, it
Homeward Bound, yeah.
Doesn't translate as well. Whereas in the book, I agree. I didn't mind it in the book. It was an interesting perspective. It was kind of, I don't know if I'd say fun, because the dog was eating her dead husband that was like 5 feet away from her off the bed. So,
and at one point licking her, ready to chomp down on her.
Yes. So it wasn't like it was awesome, but it was a very interesting perspective. And I think Stephen King did a great job with that.
Yeah.
With that part. And really the whole story is great. I'm not here to knock on Stephen King. He's obviously very accomplished, a great author. I thought the dog's voice in the book was a very, very interesting and kind of powerful in some ways.
I will say I'm not gonna obviously Stephen King has his fans. This is the first of his books I've ever read. Same for you, right? I don't know. I wasn't really into horror for a long time, and I avoided it, so therefore avoided him.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed most of this. There was one part where it said, "It's time to make like a hockey player and get the puck out of here." And I put the book down and walked away. I was so mad when I read that. It was the most ridiculous thing I've ever read. But not the most ridiculous, let's be honest. But I took too many years of writing classes with inexperienced people to say that.
It was just very surprising to see that in a Stephen King book, because we both heard so much about Stephen King. He's obviously very prolific.
Yeah, Stephen King, it's going to be a while before I try another one of his. And I mean, I have a hard time thinking of any of his books that haven't been adapted into movies. So if we keep doing this, obviously we're going to have to hit him again.
Yes, it's an abundance of material.
But yeah, I don't know if this is maybe just one of not his better ones, or because I've heard great things about like Green Mile and The Shining and It, and I want to know if we should probably go into those ones in the future day. Feel free to let us know if we are just wrong about Stephen King.
Yeah,
he's actually the greatest writer ever.
What's your favorite Stephen King novel? And if there's an adaptation, we'll probably do it eventually. I agree with Blake. It might be a little while. But I do have a friend, huge Stephen King fan, and he has a list of, his top 5. And so maybe when we get back to doing one of his, we'll do the top of that list. But
do you know what the top of that list is off the top of your head?
Oh, there's one that's just a date. 1936 or...
That's also a Netflix adaptation.
It is.
This is a Netflix original, the movie, by the way. So, I know Disney Plus wants your money, but Netflix still has stuff.
Great. Yes. I don't remember the name of it, but I do know it's just a date.
I'm pretty sure that one's also on Netflix.
Yeah.
So, maybe down the line.
Let us know.
Do you have anything else
No, I think that's pretty much what I have with the book, specifically on the book.
Let me see. So, I do have a couple things where, kind of to compare it towards the movie, one of the things that they do differently is, in the book, very first page, very first sentence, she's already handcuffed to the bed. And it kind of does this like exposition fill. And that's a move that you can make with novels that you can't really do with a movie. And I think doing it differently in the movie was a good play. And I really like how they did it in the book and how Stephen King did it in the book, because it wasn't a whole team, it was just him. So I'm not going to say they. But it was a really smart move, and it like puts you on the level of tension right off the bat
immediately.
And I thought that was a really great thing that he did. One of the other things that they talked about is in the book, the thing is that they've been doing this for months already, and that this is the first time the handcuffs have come into play.
Yeah, but they've used like ribbon and other things.
Yeah, and I don't know, I agreed with that more in this idea that they've slowly been building up to these handcuffs that she won't be able to get out of, and it isn't such a sudden jump from just like plain vanilla to handcuffs, like the
rocky road, if you will.
Yeah, there's a rocky road there. Anyway, but the slow build up makes more sense to me, and I wish that was something. Having seen the movie, I was a little surprised that it jumped right to that. It made a little more sense. Also, just her character at the very beginning of the book is a lot less submissive than she kind of is in the movie. And I liked that version more. I liked seeing that. And again, I think that was something that you kind of could do in the book, but you couldn't really do in the movie. It's not like in our adaptations, I don't think that was something that would come through.
Yeah.
But I did like that.
I do have one more final thing about the book specifically. It took way too long to end. I think you and I both talked about that. There's one part of the ending where it's telling the backstory of the creepy dude, the Moonlight Man, that I really liked.
So, like, to go into that a little bit, we find out that he's not some crazy demon creature like you think he is the first time you see him, because that's not out of Stephen King's wheelhouse.
No.
And he's actually a real guy who has a medical, like, deformity that makes him, basically, he keeps, certain parts of him keep growing no matter how long he's been out of puberty. And so he does kind of have a crazy look to him, but you find out he's just kind of a crazy guy, not this evil creature. And in the book, it gives a lot more about him. You get to learn that, you know, he has like a necklace full of men's penises and crazy details like that, which
he's a grave,
understandably wasn't in the movie.
Yeah, he's a grave robber. He goes to different cemeteries and takes bits of dead people and does inappropriate things with dead bodies. We'll put it at that. It goes into a little more detail in the book, but not an extreme amount, except for the penis necklace. But
it does at Jared's now.
Yeah. So that part I really liked. His backstory I really liked. Moving on. But there's a whole lot of other stuff in the ending of the book that it just took a long time to end.
Mm-hmm.
And with that and a lot of other things, the movie just kind of tightened it up.
That I would say that is basically what the movie does, is tighten up a lot of things. But before we get too much into the movie, let's talk about our own adaptations, like we like to do.
Yes. Do you want to start? You came up with a cast list.
So when I started reading the book, its very first description of Gerald is vastly different than who you get in the movie.
Yes.
So to start with our casting choices, let's be clear, like, this is not a knock against the current cast. Like, all of them in it do an amazing job. But, you know, for sake of, I don't know, challenge and kind of an interesting idea.
For fun.
I went with different people all across the board. Gerald, again, Bruce Greenwood does a great job in the movie. But I think John Carroll Lynch, if you don't know who he is, he's in The Invitation. He's one of the brothers who starts the McDonald's and the founder. He's the suspected Zodiac killer in Zodiac. He's one of those guys that I feel like is in a ton of movies, and he always does a great job, but he's not
like a lead usually.
Yeah, he's usually not a lead. I think a lot of people don't think of him a lot, but he's such a great actor, and I think he fits the bill for who Gerald is, because a lot of what leads Gerald to these games is his own insecurities. And I'm sorry, I have a hard time believing Bruce Greenwood has some insecurities.
Yeah, he's a bit of a silver fox.
He's like 3 times my age, and he looks 50 times better.
Yes.
And so, John Carroll Lynch was my pick for Gerald. For Jesse, I went with Jamie Lee Curtis. She has a lot of background in the horror movies, and I think, again, amazing actress. For the Moonlight Man, or whatever his real French name is, I went with Dalip Singh. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. If you've seen The Longest Yard, he's the 7-foot tall Russian dude. He actually has the malformity that they talk about in the book and the movie that character has. We'll get into the other guy later. And then for Tom, the guy that plays, or Jesse's father in the flashbacks, I thought Michael Kelly would be a good pick. Again, another guy that I just feel like he always crushes everything he's in. And I think he could do a good job of coming across as really friendly at first and making you believe he's like a trustworthy guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then also having that, he has like a subtle intensity, which I know that those words usually don't go together, but like he has that really well. So like we were talking, or do you want to go with your casting choices? Let's do that.
Well, I didn't so much do casting choices.
Mm.
I just had ideas of how I would have adapted the book. Because when I was reading the book, I just kind of put generic, slightly overweight man in the place of the husband. I didn't really think of anyone specifically, but I was thinking of how I would have adapted the concepts in the book, the inner voices and stuff. And we'll talk about how they did it in the movie in just a second, as well as their casting choices. But I think for the voices, I think I would have had more voices than they had in the movie. And then as a voice was speaking, the personified version of that voice would come into the room and speak, and then would leave, and the other one would come in and speak, and she would speak back. And it would probably be pretty hectic, but it's hectic in the book too, trying to keep track of who's who and why they speak to her in this way and why she speaks back to them in this way. That's probably that's how I thought they were going to do it. When I pondered as I was reading, I was like, how are they going to do this? And that's the idea I came up with.
To have those like rotating.
Uh-huh.
And so I thought of that too while I was reading, but the problem with that is you would have to have a flashback scene explaining who that character is for every single one of those characters. I feel like so in the movie it's just her talking to herself and her talking to Gerald, who Gerald doesn't talk to her at all in the book. Once Gerald's dead on the floor, he's out of the picture.
Yes.
But I liked her talking to Gerald as him being the voice in her head who's still trying to keep her, chained up and still trying to talk her down and like demean herself, even though it's really herself doing it to herself. But instead of having her talk to a version of herself outside of the handcuffs, I think I would have had that college roommate character. One brief flashback to explain who it is. And
then she would have been sitting there. She would have been good to go for the rest of the movie.
So instead of the half a dozen voices, I think you could do just Gerald and the college roommate.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think cutting down the amount of voices is the best option. But I think that college roommate would have been a great option. I think it would have been beneficial in a lot of ways. Rather than her just arguing with herself, she would have... I mean, she's arguing with herself either way.
Part of my thing is that, so in the movie, the version of herself that's outside of the cuffs is like telling her how to survive and how it's her fault that she's already in the cuffs and all that stuff. And I feel like if she saw that as herself, it kind of begs the question of, well, why is this voice just showing up now? Shouldn't that voice have shown up sooner? If that's really how she sees that voice as just another part of her, I feel like it should have shown up sooner, and therefore she wouldn't have gotten in the cuffs in the first place. So having it as that college roommate, as this alter ego that she usually doesn't pay attention to and is now forced to pay attention to it, I think it makes a little bit more sense with the story.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have been a great option. So,
one thing that I kind of would like to have done too is the courtroom scene. The very end. What's the guy's name?
The bad guy?
Yeah, the Moonlight Man.
Yeah, they just have it in Moonlight Man here.
Okay.
It's something,
some French kind of
yeah,
name, isn't it? Anyway, Moonlight Man does eventually get arrested. In the final scene of the movie, she goes and confronts him. And in the movie, it feels a little staged. So in the book, she goes up right behind him, and it's a little bit more realistic, where basically she sits in the the audience area. I'm not familiar with courtrooms. I don't spend a lot of time there. Thankfully. But
on the civilian side of the little fence.
Yeah.
They have set up.
So she's on that side, and she ends up tapping him on the shoulder and spitting in his face. And then in the movie, she just walks up to him and like disturbs the whole courtroom, and he turns around and he kind of makes fun of her a little bit. He breaks his chains and says, "You're only made of moonlight," which is what she says to him.
Kind of hangs his hands up like they're handcuffed.
And she says, "I remember you as so much taller."
Yeah.
And then turns around and walks out. There's a balance, a middle ground between those two that I would have liked to find. I don't know. The courtroom scene in the movie kind of pulls me out, to be honest, and I would have liked if we had adapted this ourselves. I don't know. I feel like would have gone a little bit of a different route. I really liked her spitting on him.
Yes.
I felt like
I agree
that the venom in that was much more realistic, and
I agree. And while I find spitting on people disgusting and just like the worst, it was very fitting in the book. And obviously, like watching somebody dying chained to a bed is way worse. So I don't feel that bad for him.
Mm-mm.
And I think the ending, the courtroom scene in the book was better, than the movie, in my opinion. So I think if they had done it a little more like the book, it would have been a little stronger. So yes.
All right. So let's get into the movie itself. Start off with, we have Carla. How do you say it?
Carla Gugino?
Gugino? Yes.
Yeah.
Does a great job
Sorry,
as
Carla.
Jesse. And I should be able to pronounce that name. Thank you. Does a great job as Jesse. The only thing I can think of her in is
Watchmen.
Yes, Watchmen. She plays the female superhero in the past version of Watchmen.
The older set.
Yeah. And then Bruce Greenwood plays Gerald. We talked about him a little bit. He's the CEO bad guy in iRobot. He also does, I believe he does the voice for Batman in some of the animated movies, like Under the Red Hood and stuff like that. Chiara Aurelia? Yeah. I should be better.
I don't know her from anything else.
Yeah. She plays the younger version of Jesse. She's,
she does well.
very young, so hopefully see more from her. She does a great job,
Mm-hmm. She does.
And then Carol Streakin. He plays the Moonlight Man. Creep. Yeah, the creepy guy. You might know him as Lurch from the old Addams Family movies.
Yes.
Apparently they didn't do any, well, they probably did some, but there wasn't a lot of exaggeration to play Lurch. There's quite a bit of exaggeration to play the Moonlight Man, though.
Yes.
And then Henry Thomas played the father, that in the past it goes by Tom. You might know him as Elliot from E.T., which makes me never want to watch E.T. again.
Yeah, because it turns out he's a major creep in this movie too.
Is he a major creep in E.T.?
Well, I mean, there's two creeps in this movie.
Oh, okay.
There's the present day creep and the creep in the past. And the E.T., he's a kid, and he's fine.
I was going to say, it's been a while since I've seen E.T., but maybe you remember a scene I don't.
No. But he is a creep in this movie. Kind of the worst type of person that molests children. And then those are the main. There's really not a ton of
screen time devoted to any or a lot of other characters.
Yeah, there's a few other people listed here, but I don't even know. Just bat people. It's not a huge cast list, especially when you start like basing it on how much screen time they have. So, but those are the main ones. Something to mention with Carol Straykin, the Moonlight Man, he actually has the condition that the Moonlight Man in the book has.
And in the movie as well.
Yes, and in the movie, yeah. So that was...
interesting little tidbit for you.
Interesting little tidbit. Kind of an interesting thing, and I wonder how Stephen King, well, not that he knew that this guy had it, but it's an interesting condition to put into a story, but Stephen King's kind of got that mind.
Yeah.
To kind of think of the weird and grotesque, and I mean, he's a very creepy dude in the book and the movie. His character. In real life, I'm sure he's a great man. Very nice. I don't want to harm his reputation. But yeah, that's the main cast. Like we already talked about, we both felt that Bruce Greenwood was a little older than he should have been, in better shape, and a little bit more attractive than he should have been.
Yeah.
Based on the description in the book. But he does a great job. Everyone that has any sort of screen time.
The thing is so like we talked about, once Gerald's dead in the book, his voice is gone. There's nothing more from him. Whereas in the movie, he's a major character throughout. Like, he continues talking to Jesse as this personified version of himself. And I do feel like since they were going with that, they wanted to go with someone more like Bruce Greenwood than I think the book portrays Gerald to be. Because Gerald, again in the book, not a very important character. He's literally there to set up the story, and that's it. So I can see the thought process behind going with Bruce Greenwood, but I maintain John Carroll Lynch would have been an amazing.
Yeah.
And I feel I've seen him do stuff where he kind of has that intensity and that foreboding that they went with for Gerald. It was interesting to see him. Honestly, that was one of my favorite parts, is when he dies and falls off the bed, and all of a sudden his hand comes back up and he pushes himself up and he starts talking to her, and she's like relieved that he's still alive, and then she notices, well, he's over here talking to her, his body's on the ground over there. That's one of my favorite moments in the movie.
Yeah, and even having read the book first, it was still a great moment for me, and it was shocking because it doesn't happen in the book. So all of a sudden he's standing up, and I was like, okay, this is a massive diversion, because I thought he was still alive. I was like, well, how this changes the whole movie. How does he die then? But then, like Blake said, you see the dead body while she's talking with the apparition or the personification of the way she remembers him, really. It's not him, it's her version of him. But I imagine it's fairly accurate. She lived with him for quite a while. Definitely. But you do have to remember as you're watching him speak that it's not the most reliable narrator, because it is her thinking, her perception of him.
Yeah. Which
I forgot more than once. I'm like...
They do directly address that idea at one point. I personally... There's a part where he's about to tell her, like, hey, this is you talking, like, I'm dead, you can't... But you kind of pick up on that idea right before he actually says it. Yeah. So that part surprised you. What else were you, having read the book first, you were just like, okay, this is what's going to happen next, and then?
Well, I was just surprised how much quicker everything went. Instead of having, like, I don't know, like we were talking about, it'd be a chapter or two of, like, really good, solid plot development and intensity, and then there'd be some without. The movie doesn't have that. It gets the tension right up immediately. Well, I mean, like 5 minutes in.
Yeah.
She gets handcuffed. It gets right up there, and then it just keeps you on the edge. There's at least one or two, like, kind of, I guess, jump scares, but they aren't the gimmicky kind that you get in a lot of cheap horror movies. They definitely add to the story, and most of the tension is a very good tension, not just jump scare, like, when's the ghost gonna jump out? It's like really just, it just makes you cringe.
I think the closest thing to a jump scare is when she's coming out of this nightmare that she has, and she looks down to her feet, and the Moonlight Man is like licking her toes.
Yes, that's the part I was thinking of.
And that's a great jump scare. I had to pause the movie and walk away the first time I
had
watched
chills all over.
Which, the first time I watched this, I made the mistake of watching it at like midnight. Great time to watch a horror movie. Really great idea. But yeah, then she wakes up and it's actually the dog, and that's the only jump scare I can think of, and it does it really well.
Yes, I agree. And I think there were a few other little differences that were a little surprising to me, like the dog not having a voice. We talked about that a little bit.
Did you think it would though?
I kind of imagined that they would have figured out a way to do it. And I guess they kind of did, but they showed a lot of what the dog thought in the book by just the way the dog behaved. Like the dog in the book thinks, I've got to stay out of reach of this woman. And so he would go in and be like, she's coming after me. And then she'd go back in. And then he realizes that she can't get to him. And you see that in the way that the dog acts in the movie. He'll come into the room, she'll move, so he'll go back out, and then he'll come back in, and then you can see when the dog realizes she can't get to him, because then he just starts turning big old chunks out of the husband that's dead, and just sitting there licking up his blood and chewing on him and whatnot. So I thought they did that very well. I just thought of another part that...
What?
I don't remember.
So you didn't actually think of this other part?
Well, I did, but then I forgot. Darn.
Well, one thing that the movie does really well is the setup for a lot of things. So, right off the bat, when Jessie's crawling across her knees to the bed before she's even in the handcuffs, she has a price tag on her slip. And she pulls that off and puts it up on the shelf
above the
bed. There's a bookshelf above the bed, and she puts it there. And then later in the movie, she's able to get that and use it as a straw to get some water. And the glass of water, it shows Gerald putting it onto the shelf. And it shows all these things that the first time I watched it, didn't think anything of it. But my second time watching it, you see all these little things and you see how important they are, and they're not just inconsequential. And it does a really good job of setting those things up for you, because in the book, the little slip price tag that she uses as a straw to get water, instead it's just a random thing from a magazine, which they updated a lot of the info.
Yeah, in 1992 it would have been more likely to have
a bunch of magazines on
it. Than in 2017.
Yeah, 2017 people
aren't really subscribing to magazines nearly as much.
Yeah, it's more of the online subscription idea, so they worked around that. An interesting thing that they updated was where the movie is set, because in the book it's set in Maine to line up with the solar eclipse back in 1960, I believe is when it happens. And that's a huge important part of the book, is because the solar eclipse is where her horrible event with her father happens. And to keep with the time period and how far back, they moved the story to New Orleans, because there was a solar eclipse in New Orleans at basically the same gap from 2017 to when the solar eclipse is, from 92 to when the main solar eclipse is. So I thought that was really interesting that they updated it just to keep that realism, I guess.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought was a good move in the movie is they have cell phones, but she doesn't plug it in, because this is just going to be a, 10, 15, 20 minute ordeal or game, and then she would get back to her phone. So she just sets it on a table out of reach, and then it ends up dying, and she can't reach it. She tries to reach it, so it's not just it's 2017, for some reason no one has a cell phone. She has it, she can't reach it, and it dies. So I thought it was good the way that they
Yeah.
kept that updated.
Honestly, like most horror movies nowadays, I feel like need a 30-second scene to explain why people don't have cell phones. And this, they do a good job with that, and it
Really
doesn't feel convoluted. Just to one thing in the setup of everything that I'll give to the book that it bugged me in the movie is the door they leave open that allows the dog to get in and see. So in the movie, Gerald grabs her by the arm and is like dragging her to the bedroom, and she like goes to close the door, but they move past it, and there's a shot of her staring at the door just hanging open, and she doesn't do anything about it. In the book, it explains that there's something wrong with the door jamb. It's been busted for a long time. They've been trying to get it fixed. And I felt like there was a way in the movie they could have shown that. Because her just being like, oh, I'll close it later. Who cares about the stray dog that's right outside our door? That's one of the things that pulled me out of the movie. That it seemed too convenient.
Yeah, like it takes half a second to push a door closed. And like I know that Gerald's excited to go get down, but like close the door. It's like that's just general in life advice as well. Just close the door. And in the book, it's like a screen door, right? The guy gets blown open in the wind, and if you pull it closed, it'll stay closed. But again, this was going to be a 15-minute thing. They wanted the breeze to come through. They're right on a lake, so I agree. It worked a little better in the book. I will say something that they did really well between the two is her actually escaping out of handcuffs. It was horrendous in both. So hard to watch, hard to read.
In it, to briefly explain, she essentially degloves herself, which is where the handcuffs catch the skin and just rips all the skin. So you just see the muscles and the bone of her hand. Outside of watching Raw, I think that's the closest a movie's ever gotten me to throwing up.
Yeah.
Don't watch Raw.
It was... I haven't seen it. But it was pretty bad. She cuts her wrist with some glass, and then she just pulls. And her hand her skin is just cut, and it just goes...
And he does a really good job describing it in the book. I haven't watched the movie first, when I thought we were getting to that part. Well, when I knew we were getting to that part, I thought it wouldn't faze me in the book. And then it did. It hit me all over again in a very different way, but it was still just that like pit in my stomach, and it was gross. And bravo to both the director and Stephen King on this one.
Yeah.
Who did direct this? Why have we not talked about this yet?
The director was Mike Flanagan. I don't know what else he's done.
I believe I've heard he did Dr. Sleep, which recently came out, another Stephen King adaptation.
Haunting of Hill House. I can't scroll over. Whatever. Hush.
Hush.
Apparently a lot of horror, scary things. And, I mean...
Great job.
Yeah, based off of Gerald's game, I'd say good job.
And I feel like Hush is one of those that, like, reinvigorated the genre when that first came out.
I actually haven't watched that yet. I heard it's good, though.
It's great.
Okay. An interesting thing that we found is whether or not we thought the Moonlight Man was real depended on which one we did first. Right? Because as you watched the movie, did you think he was real or an apparition?
I'm trying to...
Because I feel like in the book, he did a good job of...
making you question. Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. So
yes, reading the book first, I was like, this is her imagination. It's some grotesque, like, memory of her father, which is what she thinks it is, and it seemed reasonable to me.
So you triggered my memory.
Okay.
Watching the movie, I literally believed that the Moonlight Man would like morph into her father, and you would realize that she just had distorted the image of her father to this much more horrendous thing because it was easier to think of the person who molested her as that rather than the father who she loved. But no, yeah, watching the movie, there was this, I'm not sure if he's actually there. And then after having watched it, reading the book, I was like, he's there. You need to get out.
Yeah. And in the book, it's really good. I don't know, he does a good job. Stephen King does a good job of like making you question it. Because it's like, when he first came, I was convinced that it was just some apparition, kind of a ghost or, demon, whatever. And I was like, I kind of wanted this to be real, I wasn't looking in this book for a ghost or some demon or something. But, I mean, I still would have liked it, I'm sure. But then it does turn out that he's real. And I think it was all the better for it.
Yeah. I do think it's a little out of left field. What I understand from a lot of Stephen King's fans was, having read a lot of his stuff before, you expect it to not be real as well. But I don't know. I when he first showed up in the movie, I was a little apprehensive towards the idea because I wanted it to be more of a psychological thriller kind of thing. But yeah, finding out who he actually is one of the really interesting parts of both stories. Yeah, and it's interesting. It kind of mentions this at the end because the character, the creepy Moonlight Man in the book, he prefers men that are already dead. And so she didn't fit the bill on either of those scores. She was a woman and she was alive. So lucky her, I guess. But he was obliged to just watch her die. So he's still obviously super creep. But if she had been a man, maybe he would have been more prone to attack her or rape her or something. So it kind of, her saving grace was that she was alive and a woman. With regards to that guy. Yeah. So it's like the first time that those are her saving grace. Which is an interesting idea. Yeah, it is kind of a weird, like a twist, because those things have caused her, in her mind, a lot of problems throughout her life. More being a woman. I don't know if she doesn't like being alive, but there are times when she thinks otherwise. Yeah. But yeah. Any final thoughts? No, not really. Which did you like better? What was the better story? I really got to go with the movie just because it didn't have that make like a hockey player line in it. Yeah, that was a strong decision by them. I don't want to focus on that too much, but but also just like the tension. I feel like it did a really good job of hitting that high tension pretty soon and keeping you on the edge of your seat for most of the time. Stephen King in the book kind of took his foot off the gas, and I understand the thought process maybe, but I enjoyed the movie more because it didn't do that. Yeah, and I think I would agree. I think the movie, I liked it more for some of the same reasons, a lot of the same reasons actually. Yeah, my big thing is change that scene with the door, and 100% of the movie. Yeah, and tweak the courtroom scene to fit more the book, but maybe saw it. Yeah, and I did. Although to give, something that I liked in the book a little more, and we talked about it briefly, is the backstory. They could get into it a little more with the different characters, why she incorporated those into her psyche. There were parts of that, while a little bit long sometimes, long-winded, I did like a lot of them. And I think that's the benefit the book has, is being able to give you some backstory on a lot of these things. With the movie, I feel like it would have started just being too long in the movie. I think we've talked about it before. I think 90 minutes is a good ideal runtime. And I think if it had used more of those voices and had incorporated more of that backstory, it would have started dragging a little bit, just on time-wise. I agree. But, like always, do both. Yeah. Read it and watch it. Obviously, watching it only takes an hour and a half. Reading it takes a little longer than that, but
Both of them are good, but if you can only do one,
I would say the movie.
Yep, I agree. Watch the movie. But that's our thoughts and our discussion of Gerald's game.
Feel free to leave comments. We would so if we do get enough comments, we've talked about doing like a response and like AMA, not AMA.
Ask me anything.
No, yeah, AMA.
AMA.
Sorry. Day job has that mean something else.
Ah.
So yeah, we would like to do that. Our next book and movie that we're going to do is Annihilation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to try and get that out a little bit sooner. And it's been about 6 months?
Yeah, it's been a little while. And then more to come after that. We've got a long list of stuff we want to do. If there are movies and source material that you're interested in, that you want us to do, leave us a suggestion and we'll get around to it. We enjoy doing this, and we'll probably do it anyway, but it'll be a lot more enjoyable if you guys enjoy it as well. So
all 20 of you.
Yes. Get more. Share the video, like it, all that stuff. But this has been Based On, and thanks for watching. Nice.